those responsible for this illegal decision, and second, Russian banks. I would like to elaborate on our sanctioning of pillars of the Russian financial system, which includes Russia's central bank, Russia's National Wealth Fund, and Russia's Ministry of Defense. And of course, their ability to continue to fund this crisis. We know that Russia has been building its war chest, but these reserves will not last forever. As the economic pressure mounts from the sanctions imposed by Canada and its allies, Russia will need to seek new funding by leveraging their sovereign debt. We will make it illegal for Canadians to join in that effort, both directly and indirectly. Without a way to recover these costs, the Russian economy will be severely impacted. Let me reiterate, today's measures are just the beginning. As we have said, should Russia further invade Ukraine, it will be met with severe coordinated economic sanctions and increasing pressure if they refuse to change course. Canada's response is ready. We are prepared to target even more of Russia's financial sector and oligarchs, and we're ready to make significant announcements related to Canadian exports to Russia. Vous avez entendu le Premier ministre.
You heard the Prime Minister concerning the different sanctions. Now I'd just like to elaborate on the pillars of the Russian financial system. That includes the Department of Finance, the central banks, and the Russian Monetary Fund. They are strengthening their war chest, but that can't continue eternally. There will be sanctions imposed by Canada and its allies, and the consequence will be that Russians will have to find new funds to float its sovereign debt. But without a way of recovering these costs, the Russian economy will be endangered. I can say again that today's measures are just a beginning. If Russia further invades Ukraine, there will be coordinated increased sanctions. And the oligarchs will also feel that sanctions as well.
G7 ministers of foreign affairs this morning. I spoke to my German counterpart just this afternoon. We commend Germany's decision to suspend the certification of Nord Stream 2. This has been our top priority since the beginning, and we've been resolute in our efforts to reach a diplomatic solution. Russia is responsible for this crisis, a crisis they fabricated through disinformation and manipulation. Let me also be clear to Canadians who are in Ukraine, please leave the country. I want to conclude by saying this important message. The international community will continue to call on Russia to reverse course, withdraw its forces, and choose diplomacy. We'll continue our tireless efforts to achieve a peaceful outcome to this crisis for the people of Ukraine. The door of diplomacy is always open, but the window to do so before innocent lives are put at risk is closing. Thank you. I now pass the floor to my colleague, Anita Annan.
Good afternoon. Bon après-midi. Je suis heureuse.
I'm very happy to be here today to announce the next phase of our support for the safety and security of Ukraine, Europe, and the world.
Hier, la Russie a annoncé
Yesterday, Russia announced the recognition of the so-called independent states within sovereign borders, internationally recognized as Ukraine, a state that is the member of the UN. That was a flagrant escalation, an unjustifiable one, an unacceptable one. Since 2014, Russia has occupied Ukrainian territory, and today there are more than 150,000 Russian soldiers in Ukraine and others in Belarus.
that has underpinned the rules-based international order that has kept us safe since the end of World War II is being tested. Much to Mr. Putin's dismay, however, NATO is more unified than ever before. I've just finished a productive meeting of NATO defense ministers in Belgium and additional meetings at the Munich Security Conference, where I met with partners and allies from across the alliance, and I witnessed and felt this resolve. I can say without hesitation that our alliance shares a common commitment to defending the rules-based international order. During my time in Europe, I heard over and over again that our allies want more of what Canada has to offer, and that is exactly what we are providing today. We are announcing the authorization of up to 460 additional Canadian Armed Forces personnel under Operation Reassurance. This includes a significant bolstering of Canada's presence in Latvia, where we lead NATO's Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group. With 540 personnel at the current time, we will deploy an artillery battery of up to 120 personnel in the coming weeks. À Bruxelles, j'ai rencontré les ministres.
In Brussels, I met the ministers of defense of 10 countries that are contributing to this group and which represent a third of our NATO alliance. That will make a difference, and it speaks to the deep commitment that Canada has to NATO.
Announcing the deployment of an additional frigate, HMCS Halifax, under a NATO flag to complement Canada's current contribution to NATO's Standing Maritime Group 2. We will also provide a maritime patrol aircraft to bolster NATO forces in the Euro-Atlantic area. Today, I can also confirm that Canada has made a second delivery of lethal aid to Ukraine, and we will continue to support our Ukrainian partners as they defend their sovereignty. En cette période cruciale,
during this crucial time, Canada it moves with its allies towards this strengthening of international order.
Our NATO allies in defense of transatlantic security at this important time. Merci beaucoup, Miigwech. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Annan. We will be taking 20 minutes of questions, starting with reporters in the room. One question, one follow-up. 20 minutes de questions, en commençant dans la salle. Une question, une sous-question. Radio-Canada, c'est à vous.
Radio-Canada, Mr. Trudeau, Madeleine Desmorais, here. President Putin was very aware of the threat of sanctions. But sanctions did not make him back away from invading Crimea. So will this make a difference? Well, this is unacceptable action by Russia invading, once again, Ukraine. And I think, yes, we have been talking about the sanctions for a long time. We have imposed some. We will impose more given the invasion. But I think that Vladimir Putin has perhaps not fully estimated something. That is to say, the strength of the reaction of the international community, not just in terms of Western countries, but other countries as well, that look at this, a violation of international law, this threat not just to the sovereignty of Ukraine, but to the sovereignty of all countries throughout the world. We stand together throughout the world, and what he has done can cost President Putin very much, very highly. Do you think that there is a possibility for resolution a diplomatic one. We think that, we hope that there is always a possibility for a diplomatic solution to all acts of violence, but we have to make clear our strength, the firmness of our choice, our deep choice, and that is to always defend democracies, rules-based democracies.
Tom Perry, CBC. Vladimir Putin has clearly taken sanctions into account in his calculations on Ukraine. So I'm wondering what makes you think any of this will be effective? And if it's not, what more can Canada and its allies do? We know that the impact of these decisions that Canada is making, but also that our allies are making, are going to have real feelings, real impacts on the Russian people and on the Russian economy. Highlighting, for example, Germany's suspension of Nord Stream 2, which was going to be a significant source of revenue for the Russian state and Russian Federation. These are things that are going to make a significant difference. As Deputy Prime Minister Freeland said, our issue is not with the Russian people. Our issue is with Vladimir Putin and his decision to unilaterally violate the rule of law, the international rules-based order, and the sovereignty of the independent nation of Ukraine. You say that your quarrel is not with the Russian people, but I'm wondering what the goal of these sanctions is then. Is it to turn Putin's inner circle against them? Is it to turn the Russian people against them? And you noted that you're sending more lethal aid. Are you trying to make this as costly to Russia as possible, not just in money, but in casualties? I think as we see a rise of authoritarianism around the world, as we see challenges increasingly to democracies, to democratic principles, we need to all stand strong in defense of those values and principles. And if Putin thinks it is in his interest to invade another sovereign country, we have to demonstrate to him that it is not in his interest, that he will not come through this better or stronger, that this is harming Russia. And quite frankly, to see the impact on Ukrainian families, to see the fear, to see and to hopefully not see the violence that could be coming in the coming days as Russian troops further invade Ukraine, that will be costly, not just in terms of financial impacts, but in terms of lost lives, in terms of lost credibility for Vladimir Putin, and loss of stature for Russia that has shown that it is completely willing to ignore the principles and values of the United Nations that has kept our world remarkably peaceful for over 70 years.
Next question.
Mia Rabson from the Canadian Press. There are some who've been asking for additional troops for quite a while before today as a deterrence measure. Why did we wait until now to do this? We continue to be strong contributors to NATO. We continue to lead the enhanced forward presence in Latvia. We continue to be committed and engaged in many operations like Operation Reassurance. Today, we're announcing that we are willing to do even more. I think one of the things that we have seen with Putin's demands around Ukraine and NATO presence, that far from seeing a reduction of Western forces in Eastern Europe, Vladimir Putin has achieved the opposite. And countries like Canada and all our NATO allies are looking at reinforcing our presence in Eastern Europe to demonstrate that these actions by Russia are absolutely unacceptable. You said that you're prepared to do more if this doesn't work, but what are you looking for from Russia to decide that you're not going to up what we're doing? We are looking for Russia to stand down, to cease its violation of Ukrainian sovereignty, Ukrainian territorial integrity, to return to the diplomatic negotiation tables instead of tossing the Minsk agreement out the window as they chose to invade a sovereign independent nation.
Russia needs to stand down. It needs to understand that there are consequences for a country that chooses to use force to violate fundamental precepts of international law that has kept our world remarkably stable for many, many decades. This is something that the entire world needs to stand together with, and Canada and its allies will stand up not just for our friends in Ukraine, but for the values and principles of democracy.
Merci. On va maintenant passer au téléphone.
Now we'll go to the telephone operator.
Time, if you have a question, s'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Et la première question, the first question is from Ryan Tumilty, National Post. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. I'm wondering on the Emergencies Act, the streets in Ottawa are clear today of protesters. I'm wondering, the Emergencies Act talks about an ongoing emergency. When do you feel that this emergency will have ended and allow you to revoke the act?
As I said yesterday, this act was brought in because of an emergency, but it is proportional, it is scalable, it is time-limited and specific. Every day we receive information and briefings and analyze whether it continues to be needed, and we are looking to lift it as soon as possible. That decision will be made at the appropriate moment.
Following up.
Yeah, sir, I'm just wondering if you can be more specific. This is a huge piece of federal legislation meant to be used lightly. What is your threshold for removing it if it's not the clearing of border blockades and the streets in Ottawa?
That is exactly what we are looking at every single day as we analyze reports come in from across the country, as we hear the recommendations and operational issues faced by police agencies across the country and intelligence services. As I said many times, we do not want this Emergencies Act to be in place for a day longer than necessary, and we are looking very carefully every step of the way as to when it can be lifted. It was always reasonable, proportional, entirely subject to Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and specific and time-limited in its application. We continue to reevaluate to see when it will no longer be necessary.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
The next question, la prochaine question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse.
Merci.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Trudeau or for Ms. Annan with respect to the military deployment in Ukraine, what is already there, and with respect to the situation in Latvia. Is the goal of the mission changing? Could those military who are already there could their mission change, and could they be involved in something else? The Operation Unifier, which has been there for some years, is an operation that was intended to train Ukrainian military, and the majority, if not all of that, applied to who were dealing with a unifier have left Ukraine. But I think that the minister can deal with this more directly.
Bonjour.
Hello, Melanie. First of all, as I said, I think the safety of the Canadian Armed Forces are our absolute priority, of course. With respect to Operation Unifier, that is a very important training operation, like the Prime Minister said, but that has been temporarily suspended, and most of the soldiers are not in Ukraine at this time, but they are in Europe. Some military are in Ukraine to reinforce the embassy there, and we will make a decision with respect to that in coming days or weeks. With respect to Operation Reassurance, that is, as you know, our largest mission in Europe to reinforce the western flank of NATO. And today, it means that we are going to send several thousand more soldiers there. It's necessary. It's necessary to strengthen the western flank of NATO, but also to ensure that we are going to make our contribution to the NATO alliance. It's very important. Last week I said to my colleagues in Europe, I was there, I said to our partners there, we are there in the alliance, and we must do our share to strengthen NATO and support our partners there, our allies there. And why is that? It is for the stability of Europe and the sovereignty of Ukraine. We're there. We're there for our partners and our allies. Thank you. Well, it's not very clear in my mind what is the goal of the mission, if there is combat per se. My other question, with respect to the calling in of the ambassador, the Russian ambassador, apparently the response was, why did you wait so long to open up channels of communication? Thank you, Melanie. Operation Reassurance is there, as Melanie said, to make sure that NATO stays strong, protecting the countries in the West, our partners in NATO. We are part of that mission. We have increased our presence, but the mission remains the same. With respect to diplomacy, I'm going to give the Minister of Global Affairs the floor. Yes, thank you very much, Melanie. First of all, our channels of communication, as my colleague indicated, are open. They have been open since the very beginning, since Stockholm, since September, when I brought up concerns with respect to the Russian situation and Ukraine. First point. Second point, I instructed my deputy minister to meet with the Russian ambassador in Canada, to clearly explain that with our concern with the recognition of the two territories.
Thank you. La question suivante. The next question is from Stephen Chase from the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. Question is about our embassy staff in Lviv, and are they still operating there, and how long are they going to operate there, or have you started removing them?
We, a number of weeks ago, started to scale down our presence in Ukraine for the protection of Canadians and Canadian consular services and families. Consular services continue, including a embassy staff in Lviv, but those decisions will be made day by day as to how long our ambassador stays there and the small staff she has around her. But I'll turn to, again, Minister of Foreign Affairs for further clarification on that.
Thank you, Steve. So there are members of Global Affairs Canada and their head of mission. Our ambassador is indeed in Lviv. They are also along other countries, including the UK and the US, which is also in Lviv. We decided to move our operations from Kiev to Lviv a couple of days ago, and that was for security reasons. But the goal was to stay in Ukraine as long as possible. We think it is important that we be there to offer consular services. And meanwhile, our advice to Ukrainian Canadians is clear. If you're in Ukraine, please leave now. Thank you.
Following up.
Yeah, the second question is about the 460 number, and my question is how much of this number will be going to Latvia, and I assume the rest is you're just counting the people on the frigate and the people on the plane, which I assume was an Aurora.
Hi, Steve. Let me lay it out for you. An artillery battery of about 120 people, that is, will be the first element to deploy in 30 days for approximately 6 weeks. That congregation of people will be drawn from bases across the country. The large tranche of the 460 is going to be placed and part of the HMCS Halifax, as you suggested in your question, that will be deployed in March, towards the last part of March. And finally, the CP-140 Maritime Patrol aircraft will also have a contingent of that 460. So you can see that we are dividing up the contingent of 460 across these 3 different items. Thank you.
Thank you all. This is what ends today's press conference. C'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui. Merci.